And we are live. Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Lenore Walker, and I'm the chair of the COVID IPV group. We're a task force under the American Psychological Association's COVID task force, where we're here to try to help mental health practitioners as well as everybody who listens in on our programs every Thursday at 12 noon for an hour. We pick a topic that we talk about together with the International Whole Person Group, which has a different way of looking at mental health issues involving the whole entire person, not just our mind. So we're very excited to present today. We're going to talk about the COVID vaccine. Should you or shouldn't you take the vaccine? Now that there's been a rollout across the whole world, this is a question that we're asking ourselves and everybody else. Some of us have taken it, some of us have not. Some of us intend to, some do not. So let me introduce who's on our Zoom screen, which is also on Facebook Live. So we have two groups live on Facebook right now, the COVID IPV group and the International Whole Person group. So you can jump on either one. If you can't write at the moment, that means you're listening to this video at another time. We do record our videos and they are listened to by hundreds of people all over the world. So we're really excited that we're able to reach people with this platform. So first, let me introduce myself from South Florida. You can see my background. I try to advertise a little bit for the beautiful Atlantic Ocean and palm trees here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And with me is Dr. Giselle Gaviria. She looks like she's in Russia because she has visited there, but she really is in Fort Lauderdale also. We also have Dr. Marilyn Safer. She is here from Haifa, Israel. And we have Dr. Eileen Serlin, who is the chair of the International Whole Person Group. And she's coming to us from the Bay Area in San Francisco, California. And Dr. Eleanor Pardis, who is coming to us also from Israel, more in the Tel Aviv area. And we have Dr. Eric Pepper, who's coming to us from the Bay Area as well in California. We have Dr. Patricia Villavicencio, and she is not visible at the moment, but she will be as she is rushing to drive back from her day. She's at the end of her day, like our Israeli friends are, because they are actually in Madrid, Spain, and she's driving home from the hospital where she sees patients there. And Dr. Michaela Mendelson is also just coming on to the Zoom call with us, and she's from Boston, Massachusetts. We expect that there will be other people who will jump on the call when they can, because we're all busy working, seeing patients, teaching students. And so we love to have people come on. For those on the East Coast, it's our lunch hour. And as you can tell, sometimes we even have people from Africa, from Uganda jumping on. So we never know. So with that, I'm going to be the presenter today. I'm going to start by just talking a little bit about what is COVID-19, the virus that we've been keeping us locked down all over the world for the last year. And I'm going to talk about the vaccine, and I'm going to try to present the scientific parts of it. I'll give you some references as well. One of the references that I have depended on has been Dr. Pepper, who runs a blog. He has a blog that he'll give us maybe in the chat, how you can get onto his blog, which also keeps up with everything up to the minute. So with that, I'm going to try to put my slides on so that you can see them. Here we go. Okay. And we'll do the slideshow. Okay. I want to thank Dr. Gaviria for these beautiful illustrations. She was able to find some illustrations that really helped make looking at the slides just a little bit more interesting and pretty. So there we go. So what is COVID-19? Well, we know that it is a disease that's caused by a virus. The virus is called the coronavirus. Sometimes it's also part of the SARS family, and it attacks many of our organs. It ranges from no symptoms whatsoever, but you're still positive for having the virus, mild symptoms where you feel like you have a cold or the flu, all the way up to being hospitalized, having to be on a ventilator, and causing so many people's death around the world. We also know very little about exactly what the disease attacks. Originally, we thought it attacked mostly the lungs, and we thought it was an upper respiratory disease. And many people, their lungs were no longer functioning. They developed pneumonia, and that was part of the ventilator that they had to be put on in hospitals. And the hospital workers, our brave souls, learned how you had to turn patients in a particular way because they responded better that way to the ventilator. But this has been a year long trying to learn about it. We also know that there are some people who get better and feel fine, and others don't get better right away. We call them the long haulers. They may still have very severe symptoms, fatigue, inability to get out of bed, no motivation. We know it also affects the heart and coronary artery disease. And we know it affects the brain. People have strokes, and it affects the nervous system, brain damage, brain fog, and it affects mental illness. People develop high levels of anxiety, high levels of depression, and many people, in fact, we believe over 30% of the people who are in long-term hospitalization develop post-traumatic stress disorder as well. So there's a lot we know and a lot we don't know. But what we know, as you can see from just this little tip of the iceberg that I'm telling you, is that this is a disease that nobody wants to catch. It simply is not something that is good for us. And it's not something that people can heal from easily. So, is it preventable? Is the next question. Can we prevent catching it? Well, it's a virus. And you know, exposures to viruses are very communicative. They're very easily transmitted. And this one, like many of the others, transmitted mostly in the air and mostly if you get directly to your nose. That seems to be the most serious way of transmission. However, there were times when we thought it might be on fabric, on tabletops, on doorknobs, and we were always told, wash your hands. So we know that there are some very scientifically proven facts. Soap and water kill the virus. So the more you wash your hands, the more you use soap and water on things, you can really help prevent your catching the virus. We also know that if you cover your mouth and your nose, it's not going to get there if you cover it adequately. And so we're told to wear a mask. Some people, like people who are definitely exposed, like our hospital and first responders workers, they actually wear these N95 masks that are very secure and allegedly very few virus particles can get through to them. Some people are now saying wear 2 masks. 1 mask isn't enough. In Israel, I know some of our Israeli colleagues maybe can talk to it. They're now saying they are able to create a special kind of mask that doesn't allow the virus to go through. Exactly what that is, I'm not quite sure yet. But we do know that wearing a mask will slow or even prevent actually getting that virus. I mean, it makes sense. It's intuitive. If you cover properly, you're not going to have that virus touch your nose. But wearing a mask has a lot of problems, and we'll talk about them. I hate wearing masks, self-disclosure, but I wear it because I don't want to be sick. And social distancing. Some people say we shouldn't call it social distancing, we should call it physical distancing, because really we're supposed to be at least 6 feet, and some people say 12 feet, some people say, well, it doesn't have to be that much space, but we should not be that close next to people. So these are some scientifically proven steps that every one of us can do very easily to be able to do, and that will indeed help prevent us from catching the virus. We also can lessen the possibility of the severity of symptoms if we can't do anything else. And one of the ways is to increase our immune system. Our immunological system is what our body's natural way of being able to defend against things that shouldn't be in our body because they are harmful to us. And so there are various ways that we can increase our immune competence. One of the important ways is to be able to take vitamin supplements. Make sure that you have a variety of different kinds of supplements. Some people say take zinc tablets. Some people say take vitamin D. Every day something new is telling us. But really, it's all about making us more immune. Some people say eat the right food. Eat fruits and vegetables that really build our immune system. Green vegetables, fruits that will have a lot of vitamin D in it. So these are things that scientists tell us we can do to lessen the possibility that even if we do get exposed, that it will not be as severe. The other is to reduce some of the comorbidity factors. We know that people who are older, possibly because our immune systems are not as functioning as well as when you're younger, are more likely to get the illness more severely and die from it. We know that there are other comorbid diseases like diabetes and like high blood pressure, like kidney disease. We know that obesity and we know that stress all up the risk of more serious symptoms should we be exposed to the virus. So these are all things we can do. Why do I talk about them now? I think because it's so important for us to have control over what happens to us. And for our patients, it's very important for us to help them see that they really have a lot of control over how they handle the virus. We can't make it go away on our own, but we can indeed protect ourselves and our loved ones by doing some of these kinds of steps that we're told every day by everybody, all the scientists, and hopefully leadership in the countries where they really encourage. Some countries are doing more than encouraging people to follow these rules, that they have fewer cases. So it's something to think about. And of course, the one exciting new event that's happened is we now have drugs that can lessen the severe effects from the virus. And we call them the vaccines. And so I'm going to talk about them. And that's really what we want to talk about today is should you or shouldn't you take them? And we're going to share with you some of our experiences, our feelings about it. I'll just give you some of the facts, and then we're going to open this discussion up to the people who are on the Zoom call, but we also will, those of you who are watching us live on Facebook, type in your questions or your comments, and we will read them out loud so that we can share from how you're dealing with it as well. So it doesn't, the vaccines do not stop the transmission, but it stops the severe effects. So some people say it creates what's called herd immunity. What that means is that comes from raising animals, that when a certain number, a percentage of the animals get a particular disease, all the rest of them become immune to it as well. And so the antibodies, for some reason, the certain numbers, what the numbers are, nobody quite knows exactly, but it has to be a large number in order for those antibodies to work so well that the virus doesn't have enough choice of people or of animals, I guess, if we're using the animal experience as an example. And that's called herd immunity. So that's really the goal, is so that we help people create their own antibodies and their T cells to fight off the virus. So even if the virus comes near them, their bodies will not accept it, it kills it. So can we take those vaccines? Well, here are some questions to think about as I talk about what we know. What's the long-term risk? We know short-term they work. I'll tell you, they work up to some 94%, 95%, some 75%. That's pretty good, because most of the flu vaccines that many of you may take every year, then your clients and patients may take every year, usually only have somewhere between 50 to 70% effectiveness. So having the effectiveness on the short term is really quite good, but we have no idea of the long-term risks. And that's something we have to think about. Most people say, we've been studying it for several years, that maybe the long-term risks are not that great, but we still don't know. There are some people who definitely should not take the vaccine, and we'll talk to a few, I hope, on this roundtable. Certainly, if you have an allergy to the base in which the vaccine is made, you should be very careful about it. In fact, most of the reputable places that are offering the vaccine have people stay at least 15 minutes to make sure that they don't have the most serious anaphylactic reaction, which is a very severe one that you need to have an antidote right away for it. People want to know if they can choose. There are 9 vaccines now. Can we choose which one we can get? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. Some places you might have a choice of 1 or 2 of them, but most places it's whatever your government has purchased, and whatever you can get that's close to you. Are there side effects? Absolutely. We're going to talk about them in a minute. Can we lessen those side effects? We're not sure. Some people give us some advice, and I'll tell you about that. So these are questions I want you to keep in your mind as I tell you about the vaccines that are available. So, as I said, there are 9 of them now available worldwide. They don't stop the transmission and they don't kill the virus. They develop the antibodies so they lessen its effect in your body. The first ones I want to talk about are the newest ones. These are called synthetic virus vaccines because they don't use any kind of live proteins. They're using something called mRNA as a platform, and that will instruct your immune system with a code that's been programmed to spike protein and that will make antibodies to impact against the virus. It's a clever scientific method. And because it's synthetic, it can be reprogrammed against known variants. Viruses mutate all the time. Sometimes the mutations are not very significant, but sometimes they may. And each time it's got a little bit new scientific basis. It's called a variant. And so the two that we know that are made this way, one is made by a company called Moderna, and one is made by a company called Pfizer, along with biotech. So it's really two companies that have kind of merged together for this production. Both of them require 2 doses. So, and the doses go into the delta muscle, which is right up here in your arm, 3 weeks apart for the Pfizer, 4 weeks apart for the Moderna. And that has 94% effectiveness for one of them and 95% effectiveness for the other one of them. So that's very significant, but it needs the 2 doses in order to reach that. The first one supposedly has about a 70% effectiveness when it first occurs. And the second one has the real boost to the make the immune system response. And that means that sometimes it has some side effects. The side effects can be more serious in some people and less serious in others. We'll talk about some of them because some of us have already had both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. The side effects from Moderna seem to be a little bit more serious because they could actually cause people even 8 to 10 days after they've gotten the second shot. They may cause them to have very serious flu-like symptoms where they really feel so sick they don't want to get out of bed for 24 to 48 hours. But when they do, they're fine. No side effects from that. We also know that Moderna may have a rash that occurs about a week afterwards on the arm near the site of the vaccine. Nobody quite knows why it occurs, but it occurs and then it goes away. The second group is one that uses the same scientific principle that has already been used to create some of the other vaccines against these coronaviruses or the SARS virus. You know, the SARS virus is not new. Some of you may remember back in the mid 2000s, I think maybe 2003 or 4, we had a real outbreak here in the United States of another SARS virus. There was a vaccine at that time. Some of the other coronaviruses also have vaccines. So the 2 companies that have produced this particular brand about it uses what's called an adenovirus vector. And that reprograms and modifies your DNA that codes for the SARS spike protein. So that's interesting because some people hear that and they think, oh, you're changing my whole DNA, which is what makes me who I am. But it isn't. It's simply just that particular protein that it deals with. So it's very specific. The 2 companies that are making that have it available right now that we know about are Johnson & Johnson, and that one just got approved in the United States, and AstraZeneca. The Johnson & Johnson dose is anywhere between 65 to 85% effective with 1 dose, and that's a benefit to that. The Moderna and Pfizer vaccines need refrigeration. In fact, Pfizer needs such deep freezer that it's not really possible to send it to some places where they don't have that kind of equipment to be able to keep it frozen until it's being used. The Johnson & Johnson does not need it, and it only needs one dose to be effective. So that's vaccine, in my opinion, is going to be distributed even more widely around the world, as well as around the United States. We know that it does present, even though they say it's between 65 and 85% effective, that's 100% effectiveness. It doesn't mean it's not effective against serious cases. And it is in the tests and trials, it was 100% effective in preventing very serious cases of the virus, even though some people may get a mild case of it. So the statistics are a little bit misleading, and that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about them. The AstraZeneca vaccine is a little bit different. It also only needs one dose. And again, they talk about anywhere between 65 to 85% effective, but not the South African variant. That's the one variant that we know has arisen in South Africa. And so that's not good to give in South Africa. So again, both of them only require one dose in order to be effective. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the side effects, because I think that's something people have to take into account to decide whether or not it's worth it for you to go forward with getting the vaccination. I talked about the anaphylaxis. It's very, very rare. I think less than 1% of the people in the trials had that reaction, but it's a serious one if it occurs. So the rule is to wait 15 minutes after the shot. If it's going to happen to you, it'll happen during that period of time. You can get a sore arm at the site of the muscle that's injected. Not unusual. If you get flu shots, you know, you get a sore arm sometimes from them as well. You can get some flu-like symptoms 12 to 48 hours after the second shot, usually, if you're going to get it. And sometimes those symptoms may last about 48 hours, sometimes less. They include chills, fever, unsteadiness, lack of balance, and fatigue, which is the big one, is that people tend to feel less motivated, less able to do things. So it's advised that at least for your second shot, don't plan on doing any important work. Don't sign major contracts. Don't make a purchase that costs a lot of money, because that might be, my forensic background says that may be a good reason to get out of a contract, that your mind wasn't working quite as well as it could have worked. I talked about a little bit about that COVID arm rash. It's described as being itchy, red, hot, little raised bumps in some people. And it happens usually 10 days later. They're now beginning to see that maybe people who have had lymph nodes removed, sometimes in people who have had cancer, particularly breast cancer, but other forms of cancer may have some lymph nodes removed. And removing those lymph nodes may activate certain kinds of antibodies in your immune system. And that may be part of why some of that rash occurs. But basically, there's not much literature to tell you much about that. It happens mostly with the Moderna vaccine. People say that the Moderna vaccine, that has many more side effects, may be produce stronger antibodies. Again, nobody really knows. The advice is, even though you may get side effects, try not to take any kind of medication. If you do, only Tylenol, and not before you get the shots. Only if afterwards you're so uncomfortable that you really need something to relieve you a little bit, then the Tylenol would be okay. But they say to try not to do it because they think that the medication may interfere with the production of antibodies. So these are some of your scientific facts. Let's talk a little bit about science and politics. I think for those of us who are scientists, and we're psychologists, and of course we're scientists, we like to think that we make health decisions based on scientific facts, not on politics. But truthfully, politics enters into our healthcare system everywhere around the world. There are always disparities in who gets to see a doctor, who gets the medicine that they want, who can afford it. In some countries like the United States, if you have insurance, you can get it. If you don't have insurance, you may not be able to afford it. So we have to look at those kinds of disparities and what can we do to overcome them? Well, one of the things is that most governments are not charging anybody for the vaccine. And that's true in the United States as well. You are not being charged for that vaccine. The government is funding it. Eventually we're paying for it, those of us who pay taxes, of course, but we don't look at it quite that way. Because we know that older adults are more likely to get the virus more severely and to die from it, most of the countries, as well as the United States, have done a priority of who could get it as the vaccine rolls out, and older adults have been the first group. Healthcare professionals and first responders who are daily putting their lives at risk to treat and help people are also in that first tier. And people known to get more serious disease because they have pre-existing conditions may also be in the first tier. Going down a little bit are people with diseases that have an immune system that's already compromised. Some people are saying we should only take volunteers at first. And I live in South Florida, as I originally said, and the volunteers, especially in our older population, have not been able to get the vaccine because some of the rollout is you have to be on the computer to sign up, and computers crash and people don't always have good computer skills depending upon their age. So it's an interesting how this vaccine is being rolled out, and I want us to talk about that because each of us have had different experiences, especially in other countries. Some groups are questioning whether they should get the vaccine. They may have some good reason to question. For example, I put on top of this list of pregnant women. Do we know what that vaccine does to the growing fetus? Does it pierce the blood-brain barrier? We have no idea. How does it affect the development of a growing fetus? We don't know that either. And so we're going to talk a little bit about young women who may become pregnant and whether they should or shouldn't make that decision. It's a tough decision for them. There were no pregnant women in the original trials in the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, is my understanding. But in the new trials, there are some pregnant women. And so eventually we'll have some better answers. But right now, we still don't. We also have questions. Should those people who have been more likely to get serious effects from the disorder, in addition to older populations, should they get a proportionate amount of the vaccine? For example, we know that Native Indigenous populations have been dying much faster, getting the virus much more serious. Should they get the vaccine first before people who have a lot of money and are living in privileged areas? Of course, That's not been happening in the United States. People who have influence, people who have money have been getting vaccines in areas where very rich people live. They're mostly vaccinated, the ones who want to be. What about urban people living crowded conditions where they can't keep 6 feet apart from one another? The social distancing is impossible. Living in a small apartment with 5, 6, 8 families all piled in because that's what they have to live with. Or rural people. What about African American and Caribbean American and our Black and brown populations, where they also, we know, have disparities, and it's not, the health access is not equitable. People living in deep, deep poverty, where they barely have enough food to eat. The food lines have been enormous. People who have never had to stand on a food line to get their food before in the United States are standing on food lines now in order to feed their families, because so many jobs have been shut down during the lockdowns. So our economy has been off. What about the prison population? People living in nursing homes, children, former cancer patients with compromised immune systems. You can see there's a lot of questions about it. So what can you do? Why should you get the vaccine in the first place? Should you go shopping? Should you visit family? Should you have a hugging party like somebody on my floor had last week? Should you stop wearing a mask? Eat inside a restaurant? Go to the movies in the theater? Go to a sporting event? All of these questions are really important questions to ask yourselves and ask everybody. So with that, I want you to think about it, and I'm going to stop our slide sharing, and I'm going to turn this over to our wonderful group. We're going to serve as a panel, and they're going to share their own experiences with you. So let me stop here and put us back. Okay. Let me just, before I turn it over to you, Marilyn, I want to just introduce Harriet Adang, who's here with us from Uganda, and Patricia Villavicencio, who's here from Spain. So we're going to have a great discussion. So Marilyn, why don't you start it?
Okay, I'd like to tell you about the Israeli experience, because our Prime Minister made a deal with Pfizer that the general public was totally unaware of, because we have very detailed HMOs that 95% of the population are in one of these HMOs, and they have complete details on our medical histories. Pfizer was very keen on coming into Israel and giving that, because they have a wide range of ages, different ethnicities, African, Asian, European, people with, they have the histories of people who have all of these diseases that make them members of the more susceptible or dangerous diseases, so that they will have all this data to be able to say, where it works now. Currently, people over 80, I think about close to 90% of the population have had both vaccinations, and the people over 75 also very high, so that there's been a great drop in the number of people that are seriously ill and having to be put on intubation and so forth. On the other hand, the government is totally messed up in terms of what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed, and large groups of the population that don't follow social directions. Like I've been hearing people in my neighborhood, which is pretty spread out, that the municipality is sending out people and they're getting fined 500 shekel for not going out with a mask, whereas in the neighborhoods where we have the ultra Orthodox, hundreds and thousands of people have been getting together for weddings and funerals and so forth, and they're not doing anything about that. And these groups are suffering, like 12% of the population, and 28% of them are suffering from COVID. So that the, this is where the infections are located in some of the Arab villages as well, where people are not getting vaccinated and keeping distancing or wearing masks. So that's it. And the the effects are really quite striking. That the seriousness of the illness is going down. That's quite clear. And however, there's been some increase with young children getting COVID, as against some of the reports, and a number have been hospitalized. So there are still questions that are coming up. They were excellent in terms of mobilizing to inject the population. They set up facilities and people would come in, get an appointment, in and out in 5-10 minutes, waiting for 15 minutes. Just really amazing. It's too bad they don't run the government like that in other areas. But it,
Were you able to get the vaccine, Marilyn?
yes, I actually, I have become hyper vigilant, and I'm reading all of the research and so forth. And I was listening to the television, and they announced that they were starting vaccinations, and they were inviting people in. But my health insurance they happened to mention, like in passing, said that people could call to make an appointment. I picked up the phone. This is at 8 o'clock at night. I was on the line for about a half an hour, and I got an appointment for the second day they were giving the shot. And then, of course, I called all my friends, and at that point, the telephone lines crashed. But most of the people that I knew, and you say, that have the facilities, and were quite successful in getting taken care of. Some of the health insurances companies were better at getting organized than others, but that was really a success story, I think.
Great.
I can also,
Eleanor, I was
can,
going to let Eleanor jump in for a moment because she's also in
Yeah.
Israel, so but in a different city. So I'll let you talk.
yes, it's really a great relief. I think it's about 2 months, but all my students, my family, my children, they're all after the second shot. So it's really a completely different, and my clients too. I think I only have perhaps one, client without, but that could be of medical reasons. But so it's completely going back to, sitting in one's clinic and without masks. And, some people would rather be with masks, but we take more precautions, and we are proceeding carefully because, we know that things can be confusing and we have to be more cautious. But it's really, and I want to bring in a psychological perspective, because I teach attachment, and we teach about the strange situation. And if you remember the strange situation, the mother and the child, they come together, the strange situation, and then they separate, and then there is a reunion. So now we've all been through this strangest situation. And it's so interesting how the reunion, I mean, you can really see how people, the reunion and the hugging, like you talked about the hugging party. So you see the clinging ones and the anxiety and the don't leave, and then you see the avoidant who really are completely pissed off with the going back to normal, and they don't want to see the grandparents, don't want to see the grandchildren that much, and everyone is reconsidering. It's like, rerouting planning, because you now have to, do you really want to see your grandchildren or your children or your parents as much as you used to? I mean, the whole dating system has changed. Students don't want to go back. We have hybrids classes. I meet my students in the garden, but many students don't want to go back to university, and I think Eric had interesting thoughts on that. But it's really interesting to see that from a detachment perspective, how these making and breaking and reunion really shows our pulling the heartstrings.
It's fascinating that all of these changes. It's like re-entering all over again. Can you make new contracts, social contracts like that? Or Sunday nights may have been dinner nights at your family, and maybe you don't want to do Sunday night dinner at family anymore. There are going to be a lot of renegotiations going on.
Yeah, definitely. I had some very strong hugging, and then I didn't understand why someone was hugging me so much. We have a very big family, so here I have my nieces and nephews, hugging me and hugging me a bit more and a bit more. It took me time to sort of realize what is, what's happening, something bad happened. Why all this hugging? And then I realized it's post-COVID, because hungry for hugging, but it's like, it's not always the same way with two people. One can feel it's too much or too, but it's really, confusing, and it's just sheer joy. It's such a relief, and the ratio, the RO is dropping beneath 1. Things are reopening. It's completely. I mean, I know it'll take time when we have new COVIDs, and then we now have a New York one, and then we had the South African, and we have,
UK,
every day
right.
the UK, every day we have new news, but it's really a relief.
When I got the vaccine at the hospital, it was the happiest place in the hospital. Everybody in that room was smiling and laughing. The techs who were doing it, the nurses who were doing it, the doctors who were there, but also the people who were there. It was like, for me, until that first injection, I had so much difficulty getting it, and till the first one went into my arm, I wasn't sure it was really going to happen. And I mean, it was such a relief. So, and after the second one, it was like a weight off my shoulders. I haven't changed my behavior very much, but it just felt that way. Eric, you wanted to say something. Oh, Harriet, we can see you now. Lovely.
Well, a couple of comments. I think, I think we all want to have the opening up. So I totally agree with Eleanor that, we want to, for at least for many people, that sense of social connection, which is part of the human experience, to be in body contact or connectiveness. But just to answer the question about the vaccine specifically, because the people now are saying, well, maybe I shouldn't take the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It's only 74% effective versus the Pfizer. It's the wrong data. If you look at the Pfizer and Moderna data on one shot, it's only about the same amount, 70% or 74%. And they were tested against the Wuhan virus and not against any of the variants. And so Johnson & Johnson most likely it is equally effective, at least for moderate and severe disease. Probably would, if you ran the trials again, they may be equal. And people are talking about it. If you want to get to almost near 100%, maybe they eventually will go to a second shot. But at least Johnson & Johnson is so much easier for any country, anywhere, because it doesn't take the deep refrigeration. So most likely that'll become the dominant one. In terms of in the US, everybody's vaccine is free, by the way. The government has paid for it. So it is possible. It's mainly one of an issue of distribution. By June, the US will have an excess of vaccines for its whole population. They just bought another 300 million from Pfizer and also 100 million from Johnson and Johnson. It is more the distribution, which is an issue of our dysfunctional medical system or public health system, which the US, every state has its own rules. That's one. Two, just guidelines for people getting the vaccine. This comes not from COVID, from the vaccine for COVID. It comes from all previous vaccines, looking at antibody titers. If you get the vaccine in the morning, your body will produce more antibodies than in the afternoon. So get your vaccine in the morning. Two, if you exercise before getting a vaccine, your body will produce more antibodies than if you don't exercise. These are all out of control studies. Three, if you are stressed and depressed, you'll produce less antibodies. That's the old Kegel-Glaser work. If you are happy and joyous and empowered, you'll have more antibodies. So work on that. I can keep going through a whole list. I think those are some of the important pieces. And the pieces, the rule, keep 6 feet apart. It's a silly rule. It is airflow is critical. I just put in the chat a great article, how schools should open up. If you're concerned about it, if you're in a room 6 feet apart and the room is closed, it ain't gonna help. It's totally a fake, sorry. Because you have to ask, how do the viruses transmit? If you have airflow, you can always be much closer together, but if the air really flows through, you won't have a high exposure. The best article I saw recently, which I posted in the chat, was a nice interactive graphic published in the New York Times. I think that's probably the best way to think about it. People don't do that because it means buildings need to be changed. And the final part, which I think for psychologists and all of us is much more critical. We have COVID-19 now. We'll get COVID XX tomorrow or next year. COVID will be around, or the coronavirus has been around for many, many years. 30% of all colds are coronaviruses. So we'll get another epidemic or a variant again. The key then is, how do you optimize your immune system? Because 94% of people who get serious and fatal COVID have 2.4 comorbidities. And almost all those comorbidities are what I'll call lifestyle comorbidities, lifestyle illnesses, whether that's diabetes, hypertension, and others. So we should be doing, and that when you think about lifestyle illnesses, we think of personal responsibility. That's totally false. It's a piece of it. It is our cultural responsibility. It's our agribusiness, the foods we supply, the lifestyles we have, etc. And that's, so I think as a policy, we need to change the policies, whether it's reducing sugars in our food. I mean, I can keep going, but all that contributes to these lifestyle illnesses. And then you have the sad process of, as we age, we have immune senescence as we get older, and a cofactor of that is loneliness. And so the paradox of the sheltering in place was loneliness, which suppresses the immune system. So we need to really figure, as people who are psychologists or sociologists, how can we reconnect people so they are not lonely, they have heartwarming experiences, because a heartwarming experience enhances your immune system. So we need to get ready not for COVID-19, we need to get ready for COVID XX. And I keep going for hours on this, but I think that's probably the major parts. Oh, finally, I disagree with Lenore's statement about Tylenol. The evidence is very good in previous vaccine studies that if you have little baby mothers and you give them Tylenol, or babies in the first year, that by age 6, they have immune problems, issues. They have much more asthmas and others. Tylenol, you don't want to suppress the immune reactivity. When you give Tylenol, the anti-inflammatory, you are suppressing the body's own immune responses. So most likely, yes, your symptoms will be less, but you may reduce the antibody responses. No data, what I've heard I say right now for COVID, but I will predict that what the data will be, that those who take lots of Tylenol to suppress their symptoms are much more at risk to get COVID too.
So you're suggesting not to take anything?
Unless you're really, really unbelievably miserable, but just
That's
enjoy
really
it.
that's really what I was saying as well. So I agree totally with you, Eric, on that.
Tylenol is not helpful and it should never be prescribed. Never. I'm not a physician, only at university. It is harmful for almost all moms and first-year babies. It affects liver function. The data is really good in controlled studies in Britain. So we like to feel better. Sometimes feeling better isn't always the best thing.
And
at
we
this
also
moment.
talked about Ray's disorder or syndrome in regards to giving too much Tylenol to children under 6 as well. That becomes a problem.
Yes, so that's the only one I
want to jump in, Giselle?
Well, I wanted to mention a little bit in regards to women who postpartum, in regards to being more likely to getting COVID, and some of the studies that I was listening to and reading about from here in South Florida was indicating that the levels of progesterone being lower in women have a higher chance of contracting significant levels of COVID and intensity, and that some women are actually who are through the menopausal years are actually being recommended to take contraceptives, birth control with progesterone and estrogen, and because they're noticing that men are dying at a much more alarming rates than women, but women particularly in the menopausal years as well as after birth of the child. So they've been recommending in regards to just keeping an eye on that. And I know that right now, a lot of the research on pregnancy and taking the vaccine, I know the CDC as well as the World Health Organization have been taking into account about 30,000 women who have had the vaccine and are currently. I actually do have a friend who's a pediatrician who, while pregnant, got the vaccine. She's like, listen, there's less, at least her point of view was the side effects will be a lot less versus me getting COVID afterwards with breastfeeding and after birth. So research is continuously coming out. It's just how much are we getting really informed? Yes.
Harriet, I was going to let Harriet jump in a little bit because okay.
Well, sorry,
What's going on in Uganda?
In our context, it's very interesting also to hear. Hi, everyone. It's interesting to hear the views from the other part of the world. This is not information we have. It's literally all new for us, like information around because we're not having the vaccines, given our context as a country. We're not even testing, so we're just taking on personal precautions to make sure you take care of yourself. So it's all this information is so new for me. Just like Giselle has said that information is very important. So you can imagine most people don't even know what is going on. Like for pregnant women, women in menopause, this is all information for me. And it's very important because then if I get to learn this kind of information, it's easier to share it with the networks that I'm in as well. So people get to know this information, because the truth is we're like in another space, another world. You just have to take care of yourself because there is no money for the government to do testing. So what we are all doing is like, we're taking in like herbals. We're taking a lot of self-care, if I could say. We're doing a lot of self-care, taking lemons, taking ginger, and then wearing our masks and washing our hands, because there is no testing here and the vaccine is not yet here. So it's interesting to hear what is happening in the other parts of the world, because not everybody has this kind of space where we can actually have a conversation and learn more what is happening in the other part of the world. And it's becoming like a normalized situation here because people know we're not going to get the vaccine, or it's very expensive anyway, because they've been sharing information by the Ministry of Health how expensive this vaccine is. And as citizens, we don't even have any hope that we shall even have access to this. And everybody keeps sharing that if this vaccine becomes, if this COVID-19 becomes serious, just like Eric has said, COVID XX, if it becomes serious, I think for us we'll just die.
Well, let
It's
me
so
give you some
unfortunate.
hope, Karian.
It's so unfortunate.
I just recently heard that there is the attempt in the United States to deliver vaccine to
In
African
Uganda.
countries. So I
Yeah.
don't know whether you're going to get it or not. And I think
Now for us, because the question is this going to be free or it's going to
no,
be
free, yes,
monetary?
that's, nothing's free, but sort of free.
Exactly.
That was my understanding, but I don't know whether that's really going to happen, but that's the talk that we have. So I know we're running a little short on time, but I wanted to ask Patricia if you wanted to say a few words, and then I know Eric, you want to go back as well. And
Well,
yes, you as well.
Being ex-patient, cancer ex-patient, plus I have all the plus for not getting the shot, the vaccine. And I just cross my fingers and say, okay, and I work in a public system. What is happening in my office? My patients don't come that much. So there are many patients. Yesterday at the hospital, none of my patients appeared. So people, there were 6 scheduled, and one was at school and the other one, well, and I think people are scared to come to hospitals and even to a mental health center. Many people don't come to the appointments. And on the other side, today I read one of my colleagues saying that at the hospital, child's hospital in Madrid, there were 15 kids, younger kids, in a waiting list, waiting to enter the inpatient unit, just in that hospital. So mental health issues are rising up, and kids are being affected a lot. And since this is more than a COVID thing, it's mental health pressure that we all are having, especially as professionals working in the health system. Many of my colleagues got COVID in the first 1 year ago, and unfortunately I did not get it. I think we're only 4 that did not get it, and we were about 15 teammates, and most of the people in the building got COVID. So, and I have a friend who right now, who is my best friend, had COVID, and she's a psychologist in another part of Madrid, well, out of Madrid right now. And she has pneumonia after 4 months having had COVID, and it's not COVID. The doctor said it's a side effect. So please, if you have had COVID, don't feel that you'll be safe. Please take care of yourself. And, you know, this vaccine, as you said, Lenore, it's a way, one way to be safe, and not the only way. At least there are many things, Harriet, that Uganda is doing. You know, people are washing their hands, trying to wear masks, social distancing, and as Eric
Building
said,
the immune system is
yes,
very important.
yes, we need to start thinking about how to get hope for us, all of us, and I have hope, and I keep encouraging me my own hope. We need to do this kind of projects and try to do exercise, eat well, and watch out for not being depressed and being listening to the news. News are horrible. So I stopped listening to the news. When people tell me the news, I say, okay, but I try to listen to other news that give hope. And the most beautiful thing that we've experienced is that many people have had gathered together to in solidarity to help other people. So isolation, we know that isolation, it's a risk factor. So let's find a way not to reach out for those that are isolated. And I say that, I send that message. Thank you so much.
Lovely.
Thank you,
Eileen,
lovely.
before we get off, let's let Eileen jump in. Eileen, unmute. We can't hear you.
You need to
You're
unmute.
muted.
I can't. It says the host has muted me. I couldn't unmute. In the interest of time, I'm just going to say thank you. And for all this wonderful information. We are having at the San Francisco Psych Association, we're going to have a series of discussions now about the sort of what next. And I think that's really what I'm facing. My husband is sick with the effects of the second shot right in the next room. And we're all sort of on that edge of what next. And we're seeing so many different reactions. People going back to offices, people not, and people wanting to, what have we learned from COVID? And we're not going to go back to this new normal, the old normal. So it's really a period of not knowing now, and just to live with that uncertainty and be brave about making changes that needed to be made, that we learned about through COVID, and that we actually maybe can make changes in our lives as we move forward. So also, but to tolerate the not knowing for a while.
That's been the hardest, hasn't it?
Make good choices as we move forward. Yeah. Can't take anything for granted.
Eric,
I just wanted to ask.
I know everybody wants to say something. Yeah, go on. We're okay.
I just wanted to ask for those that have taken the vaccine, what has been, how are you, like what is the word, the impact, the effects, how do you manage it? And because I know it's probably affecting everybody differently. And how do we then prepare people who are, when, for example, it comes to our space, how do we prepare ourselves? Because the reactions are different on children, on young people, on older women. How is it impacting the gender impact, I would say? How is it impacting women and men differently? And how are we managing this? Because I know this can also have a psychological impact. And already somebody who has gotten it can share the experience. And that would be very important to also know, for example, how Eileen said your husband is now nursing the impact. I don't know if I got it right.
Yep.
Is it supposed to even, are we supposed to have that effect? Or it's supposed to be a simple process? You go and they vaccinate you like they vaccinate us with the polio vaccine, we have different vaccines that they inject us with, and sometimes they actually don't have any impact, any effect. They just inject you and you're normal. You just go ahead with your daily life. How are we handling this, and does that also teach us something about the gendered impact of the vaccine? To have a gender analysis around this in terms of how women, men, boys, and girls are being affected by this vaccine.
I think it's a great question, Harriet. Next, we're going to have to, we don't have a lot of data to say that. I can tell you that both my husband and I had it. I had no effects. The first shot, I had a little sore arm for maybe a day. The second shot, I had absolutely no effects, except that I was very tired the next day. I just didn't feel like doing anything. My husband, on the other hand, had chills and he felt a little sore throat, and then he was fine the next day. Eric, I think you've had it.
I had it, and a couple of my colleagues have had it, or many people I know have had it. Overall, the first shot, most people feel some pain in the deltoid. It's a variation. The majority of people, the first shot is not, just very little side effects except the pain that you get from the injection site. 1% or less potentially could get, even less than that. It's a couple of per million. It's really, who really get anaphylactic reactions, very low. I think it's 4 or 6 per million for the Pfizer and Moderna. I don't quite know the exact numbers. The second shot, a number of people report getting some form of flu-like, I'll call it flu-like symptoms slightly. It varies on the individual. It's not that bad. And for a few people, it's very bad. I don't think there's much breakdown. I'll end finally for me, because I need to also go, is the question, I think, people, when we have these illnesses, we often feel hopeless. There's nothing we can do. We feel powerless. And I think we really want to say, is there anything we can do proactively? Because we're going to get COVID XX coming down this pike. A new variant will come down. The Brazilian variant seems more fatal, has more.
And more likely to catch it a second time. That New York Times reports.
And therefore, if you have a good immune system, it probably works better. The single observation in the research right now in the literature is that people who get COVID seriously have very low vitamin D levels in their bloodstream. Which makes sense, and that's why it's like a flu in northern hemispheres. That less sunlight. People with darker skins tend to have much lower vitamin D levels in their bloodstream because they're so. Therefore, preventatively, maybe take some vitamin D, get it up more normally, be more outside, and when you're outside, also in nature, that's healing as well. And look for a positive future and connections, because when you are more optimistic, your body produces better antibodies, we have better survival. I'm sorry, I have to go.
Yes, we all have to go. The other thing I was going to say, Harriet, is the lemon produces vitamin D. So some of the things that you are doing with natural foods and being outdoors and all is really going to build an immune system. We have not looked at the Israeli data to see if there's any difference between men and women. So hopefully Pfizer is doing some good research on that. I think that's going to be interesting data from Israel, from that study to see. Right now, it's all anecdotal data. We don't know. But I think the most important thing is that the people who are vaccinated are feeling comfortable about the vaccine, that and that the Moderna is the one that has more side effects. The others don't seem to have very many side effects. So with that, I want to thank everybody. This has been a very lively discussion, and everybody stay safe, wear our masks, wash our hands. By the way, you see my hand was I had my procedure. It's now healing, but look at the difference in size. You can see this, how swollen my hand is. But it's going to be fine. And with that, we'll see you all next week. Eileen, you're going to be presenting. Your group will be the presenting group for the next week. So we're very excited, and we will see you all then. So bye for now.